I am so thrilled personally to be introducing Elizabeth because, like you and millions of other people around the world, I'm a tremendous fan of her work. Elizabeth has a unique voice, and in more ways than one. Before becoming an author, she sang in a rock band, just in case you thought she couldn't be any more impressive. She also worked as a registered nurse for 10 years, and she credits that with teaching her a lot about human nature and the hopes and dreams and fears that connect us all. She manages to fill her books with those emotions, which is why they resonate so deeply with so many readers. It is impossible to recount all of the praise that Elizabeth has won for her more than 20 novels. So I'm just going to mention a couple of highlights. Her book Open House was an Oprah pick and made into a CBS movie that won the Nielsen ratings. 2 of her other books have also been made into television movies. Her books Durable Goods and Joy School were both selected as ALA Best Books of the Year. And Talk Before Sleep was shortlisted for an Abby Award. Elizabeth is the author of 2 nonfiction books, one with the delicious title, The Day I Ate Anything I Wanted, and Other Small Acts of Liberation. That may be the best book title I've ever heard. Critics rave about her books. The Chicago Sun-Times says, she has a knack for taking you right into the soul of her characters as they respond to joy and tragedy in a perfectly imperfect way. Booklist calls her an enchanting storyteller who delights in the eccentricities that shape complex personalities. She is also an avid appreciator of the pleasures of food and an advocate for kindness. What I love most about her writing is how deeply she uncovers universal truths and how kindly she treats every one of her characters, even as she unveils their flaws. I gobble down her books like chocolate, but kind of like they're a magically healthy kind of chocolate that actually make you feel better, not just about yourself, but about the world after you read her books. It's my honor to introduce you all to Elizabeth Berg, who will talk today about her new book, Once Upon a Time, There Was You.
Oh, hello. Isn't this great? I mean, the weather, there's dogs here, there's food here, there's people looking at books here. It's a good day. Thank you to everybody involved in inviting me to be here. I'm going to get my hair out of my mouth and then we'll commence here. I get asked a lot of questions as a writer. Primary among them is, where'd you get that purse? I'm just going to get this out of the way right now. There is a website called, a little bit oddly, called The Careful Peach, thecarefulpeach.com. And she has the best things for women. And you few men who are out there, if you're looking for a gift for a woman, that's the place to go. Jewelry, purses, tableware, and so on. That woman owes me a lot. I'm really not here to talk about The Careful Peach. I'm ostensibly here to talk about my latest novel, which I'm happy to do. I'll tell you a little bit about that. I'll read very briefly from it. I always feel bad when authors say, well, I'm going to read a little bit. I hope that's all right. I love listening to people read. I love it, and I love doing it. Nonetheless, it'll be a very brief reading. But what I'm going to do in the future is I'm going to have readings at night, late at night, with booze, and the people who come will come in their pajamas, and there will be recliners everywhere, and we'll just all read to each other, and then we'll have a slumber party. So I'm working on it. I mean, I'd go. Wouldn't you go? I'd go. So novels come about for a lot of different reasons for me. Sometimes it's because I want to explore something that happened in my life. Sometimes it's because a character walks right into my head and starts talking. All kinds of different reasons. This time I was reading a wonderful collection of short stories called If I Loved You, I Would Tell You This, written by a woman named Robin Black. And I came across the line, marriage is a funny thing, even after it's over, maybe especially then. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I wanted to write about people who used to be married and presumably were once quite intimate with one another, now have been divorced for a long period of time and have to come back together again and are again in the same house living together. What would happen? What would that be like? Would they remember everything they loved about each other? Would they remember everything they hated about each other? What would happen? So that was the premise. And I always have the vaguest of ideas when I start, mere slips of ideas, but that's what fueled this novel. I don't always know what my novels are about, really, until I finish them, nor do I plot. It's a surprise to me how they develop and how they end. But when I finished this one, I realized it was about love. It was about how people come to different ways of loving. Sometimes it's a surprise what we end up loving most in our lives, particularly as we get older. But I didn't feel satisfied after having written this novel that I really knew enough about love. So I consulted the experts, namely children. And I want to share with you some quotes I got from kids about love. This is from a 7-year-old girl who, upon being asked, "What would you do if someone told you that they loved you?" said, "I would probably say, okay then, bye." That's a lot like one of the characters in this book, by the way. An 8-year-old boy said, "Love is that first feeling that you feel before all the bad stuff gets in the way." And this is, believe it or not, from a 4-year-old boy who said, "When someone loves you, the way that they say your name is different. You know that your name is safe in their mouth." That guy's a little poet, I know. I wonder if he's free. Available. Here's a 6-year-old girl. "If you want to learn to love better, you should start with a friend you hate." 7-year-old. "Love is when you tell a guy you like his shirt, then he wears it every day." Another 7-year-old girl. "When you love someone, your eyelashes go up and down and little stars come out of you." That girl is headed for a fall. This is an 8-year-old girl. "You shouldn't say I love you unless you really mean it. But if you mean it, you should say it a lot. People forget." So, man, I don't know if you can say anything better than all of that. I want to tell you a little story. When I was a kid, I really wanted to know how radios worked. And I thought that they worked because little people lived in them. And when it was their turn to be an announcer or be a singer, they would come up to the microphone, and everybody lived in there. It was crowded, but they all got along, you know, all the men in their little tuxedos and all the women in their formals. Well, my father disabused me of that notion pretty early on, but he did not tell me how radios really worked. So I took it upon myself to bring a radio outside on the sidewalk with a hammer, and I beat it open, and all the radio guts fell out, all the wires and tubes and all that stuff. And I realized when I looked at the mess that lay before me that I still didn't know how radios work, and now I'd broken the thing. And that maybe what I should do is stop worrying about how it works and just enjoy the music. And this, as you may have guessed, I think is a fitting metaphor for love, that when we overanalyze, when we dig too deeply, when we try to take it apart, when we try to justify, when we try to rationalize, we break it. So that's a lesson I learned in writing this novel. So I'm going to read you just the prologue. I always kind of wonder, well, what's the best thing to read? Because, you know, when you go and look at a book, here's what I do. I read the beginning. I read the end, because God knows I won't remember the end by the time I get to it if I read it. And then I flip through the middle looking for interesting little tidbits. For me, if the writing doesn't hold, I don't want to read the book. It needs to be engaging. I need to find those little tidbits here and there. And I always hope that I'll have such a tidbit to offer, but it gets too confusing trying to pick which one, because, you know, writers are always in love with their own work. Isabel Allende is such an honest writer. When she was asked, "Who do you love most to read?" she said, "Most of all, I love myself." So, but anyway, I'm going to read you the prologue. And then I want to tell you about somebody else's book. Because I went to a book festival recently and there were a lot of poets there, and I love poetry, and I went to all the poets' readings, and you know what they did? They spent about half their time reading other people's work, which I thought was so generous and good and wise. So I'm going to tell you about another book. Don't let me forget. All right, here's the prologue. Pretend you're in your jammies, your glass of wine nearby. When John Marsh was a young boy, he used to watch his mother getting ready to go out for the evening. He stood beside her dressing table and listened to the sounds she made tamping down her lipstick, and he took note of the 3/4 angle with which she then regarded herself in the mirror as though she were flirting with herself. He watched how rouge made her cheeks blossom into unnatural color, and how the little comb she used to apply mascara made her blonde lashes go black and spiky. She always finished by taking her hair down from pin curls and brushing it into a controlled mass of waves, which she then perfumed with a spicy scent that reminded him of carnations and oranges both. Finally, "How do I look?" she would ask him, and he never knew what to say. What he felt was gone. For though he had stood beside her, watching her every move as she transformed herself, he was never sure that the made-up woman before him was still his mother, and this made for a mixed feeling of fear and confusion. Nonetheless, he always smiled and said softly, "Pretty." Before he turned 6, she was off living in another state with a man who did not care for children. The rare times John saw her, she came and stayed in a nearby Howard Johnson, and she would buy him dinner there. While he ate, she would sit smoking, sneaking looks at her watch. Many years later, on the eve of his wedding day, 36-year-old John sat in a bar talking to his best friend, Stuart White, Stuart himself happily married for 12 years, about how he was suddenly consumed by doubt. He sat morosely on the stool, chatting now and then with the women there, many of them beautiful, and understood that it wasn't that. It wasn't that he wanted anyone else. When the blonde sitting next to him offered a cigarette, John took it. "What are you doing?" Stuart asked. "You don't smoke." And Irene hates cigarette smoke. "Yeah, I know," John said. "I think she has an allergy or something." He put a match to the end of the cigarette. "Whoa," Stuart said. "Are your hands shaking?" "My hands aren't shaking." "They are too, man. Look at 'em." John looked at his hands, and his friend was right. There was a fine tremor. He ground out the cigarette, shoved his face into his hands, and moaned. Stuart said, okay, buddy. You just need to calm down. Try this. Think about when you asked Irene to marry you. Why did you ask her?" John looked over at him. "She didn't wear makeup?" When Irene Marsh was a young girl, she used to have a play space in the basement where she lined up her many baby dolls. One by one, she fed them, burped them, and rocked them to sleep. It brought her a rare peace to care for her babies. It took her away from what went on between her parents, the yelling and the hateful silences which were worse than the yelling. She sang lullabies into plastic ears and rocked inert little bodies. She prayed each night on her knees to get old enough to live with someone else in love, which is why it was a little surprising that on her wedding day, she sat weeping in the bride's room. The place was ornately decorated, a multi-tiered chandelier, embossed ivory wallpaper, 2 elegant club chairs upholstered in tangerine silk, the table between them holding a bouquet of white freesia, and a crystal bowl full of Jordan almonds, for good luck, Irene knew. In the adjoining powder room was a vase of creamy white orchids, pristine linen hand towels, and a gold basket of mite needs decorated by a length of wide satin ribbon. When Irene had shown the bathroom to her best friend and only bridesmaid Valerie Cox, Valerie herself happily married for 9 years, Valerie had said, "Oh, everything is so pretty." Irene had stood there, imagining herself as a speck on the ground, Valerie as a plane rising higher in the air. What Irene had felt about the decor was only a sense of outrage at the excess. 15 minutes before the ceremony was to begin, Irene sat on the bench before the white vanity with her back to the mirror. She had just put on her wedding gown, a dress that was purposefully plain and might, in fact, work for every day were it not floor length and made from ivory Kiana. Her hair was loose about her shoulders, not as yet styled into the upsweep she'd planned. Her satin heels lay in a little jumble on the floor beside her, her veil across her lap. The bridal bouquet sat unpacked in its box in a corner of the room. "But I thought you were sure," Valerie said. She was standing before Irene, holding her friend's trembling hands in her own. "You said you were absolutely sure." "I know, but I want to go home. Will you take me?" "Well," Valerie didn't know what to do. She spoke in a near whisper, saying, "Irene, you're 36 years old. If you want children—" "I know how old I am, but you shouldn't get married just to have children. I can't get married just to have children." She drew in a ragged breath, snatched a tissue off the dressing table, and blew her nose. Valerie spoke slowly, saying, "I don't know. Getting married to have children isn't such a bad idea. And besides, you love John, don't you?" Irene stared into her lap, picked at one thumbnail with the other. "Irene?" She looked up. "I can't go through with this. Please, it's wrong. Go and get the car, okay? We have to hurry. If you don't want to, I understand. I'll take the bus. There's a bus that goes by here." Valerie cracked open the door to see if anyone was out in the hall. No one. Then she knelt on the floor before Irene and looked directly into her eyes. "Listen to me. If you do this, you can't take it back. Do you understand that? It's not just a little tiff and then you apologize and get married next week instead. If you do this, it's the end of you and John. Do you understand that?" Irene nodded. "I do, so to speak." Valerie stood, crossed her arms, and sighed. "What about all those people out there? There must be 200 people. Do you want me to make an announcement or something?" "Oh, yes, yes." Irene rose and carefully draped the veil over one of the club chairs. "Apologize for me, okay? Say I'm sorry. I am sorry. And be sure to say that I'll send all the gifts back right away, tomorrow. I know this is hard. I'll make it up to you. I promise." But then Irene's father poked his head in the door and said gruffly, "Let's go." And Irene put her veil on, stepped into her shoes, and linked her arm through his. "Irene?" Valerie said. And Irene said, "No." So you can, oh, thank you. I really love trains, except when you're trying to hear. You can see, I think, why this marriage maybe didn't last. But nonetheless, they do have a deep love for each other, which, well, I won't say any more about that. You can read the book if you want to know more about that. Now, let me tell you, do you know this writer Eric Puchner? I think it's pronounced Puchner. Anyone familiar with him? This is a collection of stories called Music Through the Floor, and it's stunningly good. And I had the thought that I, like the poets, would read his work to you, but then I thought probably you shouldn't do that, so I didn't do it. But please, if you're interested in really good writing, and particularly in short stories, which I think are particularly wonderful, check him out. He's really good. He won a bazillion prizes for this, but it's so authentic. And it's the kind of prose that, I mean, even when you're tired and lying in bed and reading, it makes you want to jump up and go tell somebody about him, which I have done. Okay. The title is Music Through the Floor. Yeah. Thank you for asking. Okay, I'm happy to take any questions you have about anything, including recipes, as you know. Okay, bye. You have one?
Well, it's just, I'm so thrilled
You're a good woman.
I did my mommy duty, so when I saw you were here today, I was so excited, and I have anybody who talks about authors, I say, have you read Elizabeth Berg? You have to read
Thank you. Yeah. Word of mouth. This is a very nice woman who meant to come to another reading and went to the parent-teacher meeting instead. So here she is today. Yeah.
So did I. And I left when I was 19 and off on my journey as a military spouse, and I was reading my Elizabeth Berg novels, and the character's mother took her to Red Owl. I was like, oh!
Red Owl. Yeah.
Nobody else was going to know what Red Owl was.
Yeah.
This moment of connection that was so awesome.
It's okay. It's such a strange name for a grocery store. Red Owl. I mean, who would think? I like Piggly Wiggly much better. At least you think, oh, bacon. You know. Anyone else? Yes. Was what? Uh-huh. What is the backstory for the novel Pull of the Moon, which is in part an epistolary novel, and then it alternates letters with entries in a journal. And she's asking if I can remember what inspired. I remember exactly. I was at the time living in Boston, and I was over in Cambridge in a bookstore, and I was looking at journals, and there was a lovely journal there. It was tooled leather, turquoise, with a big silver button on it and a rawhide closure, and I really wanted it, even though I'm always afraid to write in journals when they're beautiful, because I don't want to spoil them, so I usually do nothing with them. But the price was $40, and I thought, I'm not paying $40 for a journal. Who would pay $40 for a journal? And the character of Nan walked into my brain and said, what? I would, what? Because Nan is, money's not a problem for Nan. And so I became kind of obsessed with that character. Why would she buy that journal, and where is she going to go, and what's her life like, and so on. And that's how it began. I did buy the journal. Well, I had to. It was research, you know. Yeah, I called a friend who lived near the bookstore, and I said, oh, go over to that bookstore and buy that turquoise journal. I'll pay you back. I got to have it. I have to have it beside me when I write this novel. So yeah, I still have it. I still don't write in it, but I do glue lovely photos and so on in there. Yes?
I've read all of your books, except the brand new one, which
Yeah?
is good, yeah. But my very favorite was the Joy School, and you know the little girl in that book, or is she just from your heart?
She's asking about Joy School. Did I know that little girl? Joy School and Durable Goods are highly autobiographical novels, which is not to say that I'm Katie, because Katie is a much better person than I'll ever be. But many of her perceptions and thoughts and feelings are based on ways that I felt when I was a kid. Yeah, yeah. She's my favorite character of all my characters. Any of you taking pictures, don't you put those pictures up on the internet. I am tired of seeing bad pictures of me up on the internet. I'll send a lawyer after you if you do that. In fact, just stop taking pictures. It's over, okay? Yes. Who are some of my favorite writers? In addition to the one I told you about, Alice Munro, who is a Canadian primarily short story writer. I love Ellen Gilchrist. There's a really good Ellen Gilchrist in the used. Did you get it? Oh, I was maybe going to get it, even though I already have it. Ellen Gilchrist is another favorite. Oh, there are so many, and I always forget when people ask me. I like Sue Miller. Ann Tyler is one of my favorites. I don't know. Willa Cather, Jane Austen, E.B. White. That's enough. Let's not talk about them. Let's only talk about me. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the television club? What happens when you see a book become a television or movie experience? What's that like as an author to see something that you crafted change?
I know enough about it to know that when your book becomes a movie, it changes. It has to, because the structure of film, whether it's TV or feature film, is so different. It has to be structured in a certain way. So they have to lose a lot of material. Sometimes I think it turns out well. Range of Motion, for example, I think was a good movie. Range of Motion was a pretty good movie. Then they did a novel of mine called Say When, and that they changed the title and every other thing that you could possibly. Did you see it? Oh my God, it was bad. It was called. Is anybody from NBC here? Okay. It was called A Very Merry Christmas, and it was pretty. Not my favorite movie. Anybody else? Yeah. This one? What was it? Oh, the last time I saw you. This is really, I was at a party and Home Safe had just come out. And a woman asked me the name of my latest book, and I couldn't remember. I really couldn't remember. It was very embarrassing. So I said, I can't remember. And then she drifted off over by the hors d'oeuvre table, and after about half an hour, I ran over and said, I remembered, and told her the title, and by then she didn't care. But that wasn't your question. So I wanted, I just wanted to write about high school reunion, and that was another case where the character walked into my head. I saw her I saw her getting ready to go to, she was practicing for her reunion. She was drawing a beauty mark in above her lip to see if it would look good. And she was thinking about the guy she had a big crush on in high school. So it just went from there, and I wanted to get inside everybody's head, so it's multiple points of view, and it was really fun to write. I saw the 5-minute sign back there about 10 minutes ago, so I think in violation, I'll take one more question, and then that's it. Yes? Okay. I've written all my life is the answer to the second question. I not only have a golden retriever, I now, in my stupidity, have a puppy. And when I walked in the door with the puppy, the golden went. But now they're friends. Yeah, it's fine. Okay. I want to tell you that when I was introduced and she said something about I had another voice, I thought she was going to talk about my chicken imitation, which I'm sorry we don't have time to do, but I can do a chicken doing many different emotions, so next time. Thank you very much.